We will start the last session of the day before the plenary and the closing plenary. This session will be devoted to the securing the supply chain and understanding the customer. It has been questioned a lot of customer in this Congress. And to be the moderator of this session, we will have Mr. Paul Warrenson, who is partner of the Intellectual Property Department of Baker McKenzie in the United Kingdom. This session will last until 4:30 sharp because the plenary will conference room upstairs. Paul, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So, just in case you've got the wrong room, this is securing the supply chain. And you have to listen because there are no slides. So each of the speakers in a second will talk about some particular topics. First of all, I'd like to introduce the speakers very quickly, starting with Bob at the very end. Bob Barchesi currently serves as the president of the IECC, a well-known US anti-counterfeiting organization representing the interests of some 200 members across industry and trade groups. Bob also served as the Director of Investigations at the Recording Industry Association of America. And before that, he was in the NYPD, amongst other things, in charge of various things, special agent in charge of investigations, and in the US Virgin Islands and Chief of Police in Crystal River, Florida. So Bob's well qualified to roll his sleeves up and talk about the issues in the US. Darcy, who I will hereinafter refer to as the boatman, is the second furthest from my right. Darcy began his anti-counterfeiting career right here in France when he was with Danone, the French group Danone, starting with some interesting anti-counterfeiting cases in Egypt, I believe, Darcy. And he was also legal director for Merck in the Middle East and Africa, reducing the deadly trade in smuggled and counterfeit merchandise for Merck. He was also director of the PSI, the Pharmaceutical Security Institute, representing 22 pharmaceutical companies, overseeing worldwide investigations into criminal counterfeit networks. And in that role, he expedited the arrests of counterfeiters in France, Italy, and South Africa, and also did undercover work in Tijuana. And his work there was submitted to the US Congress, and that made counterfeit medicines a priority for the US Drugs Administration. Darcy also worked for the cigarette industry for several years in Eastern and Central Europe, and he's now the Director of Anti-Counterfeiting for CropLife International, advising 6 major pesticide companies on the dangers of pesticides in worldwide trade. He's also an American lawyer. And next for this is Christophe. Christophe, hereinafter referred to as the Watchman. Christophe is based in Basel in Switzerland, studied law and history at the University of Basel, and was assistant international law at that university. Most relevant to today's discussion, he's been since 1990 the head of the legal department of the MCH Group, which is the leading Swiss company that operates exhibitions and trades in Basel, Zurich, and Lausanne. These include Basel World, which is the annual trade fair for the watch and jewellery show, hence the Watchman. He's on that, in that capacity, secretary of the panel of an arbitration unit which has been set up to deal with IP infringement cases, and since 1985 has handled over 800 complaints in that capacity. Second nearest to me is Christian, who's at Philip Morris as Manager of Regulatory Affairs and Brand Integrity, and he's developing and implementing strategies to address illicit trade at Philip Morris. Before joining there, Christian had extensive experience as a negotiator of international agreements for the Clinton Foundation, and prior to that he provided capacity building support and operational and technical advice in different roles at the UN, so no stranger to speaking in audiences like this. Christian has a degree in political science from Pisa and a master's in international affairs from the Institute of International Political Studies in Milan. And last but not least, Olivier, who I guess will have to be the postman, in the sense that Olivier is head of customs and international trade at La Poste Group, in charge of the worldwide group activities. His main tasks are to deal with customs, trade and international authorities to help them better understand the post industry and negotiate improvements for the business. As vice chair of the customs group of the UPU and of the contact committee between UPU and WCO, he's very much a go-between for industry and the customs world. He negotiates with the DHS and CBB and the EU Commission and Chinese Trade Ministry on all aspects of postal trade internationally. Challenging role, I'm sure. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your diligence in attending this penultimate session of what I hope has been a very enjoyable and successful Congress. But I'd like you to take away from this session, I hope, some real practical takeaways of what we might be able to hear from the panelists today. The backdrop to this session, which is, as I say, the securing the supply chain, is to look at the role of intermediaries in the supply and distribution of counterfeit goods. What we mean by intermediaries are, in some senses, represented quite proportionately by the panel members. So we have landlord issues, vessel and shipment issues, exhibitors exhibiting counterfeit goods potentially, and of course the Postal Service and free trade zones, represented by different panelists here. How do those intermediaries stand up when it comes to their responsibility for handling counterfeit goods? Now, recently Baker McKenzie, my firm, was asked by BASCAP to undertake a study as to the legal ramifications of this topic by looking at this question in over 50 countries worldwide. And I can only sort of tantalize you with the report because it's not yet ready for publication. But we do have a preliminary report which was presented to the BASCAP Steering Committee recently and will be the subject of further discussion in the meeting tomorrow. And that report looked at this very question of the responsibility stroke liability, potentially, for intermediaries in the supply chain. And you may be surprised to hear that there is far more potential for legal responsibility of those players than you might think. The panelists here are going to talk through some of those topics and how that plays out in reality in their lives, in their jobs. But what I wanted to say was that this topic is going to be, I think, increasingly important, both at this Congress and as a topic for the trade to take increasingly seriously. The reason I say that is because the tentative findings of this report show that whether by virtue of what we call contributory liability, secondary liability, or joint liability, or simply some sort of duty of care that's established in some part of the supply chain, there is a risk of a growing responsibility being pushed onto intermediaries so that the players in this theatre of counterfeiting are not just the brand owners and the counterfeiters, but a series of players in the middle. And what they should do to help reduce counterfeiting is the question. But the way we'd like to phrase the question today is not just to sort of ponder about the legal ramifications, apart from the fact that not many of you may well be lawyers and get bored by such topics. The reality is that that backdrop of a legal framework, which is there in some shape or form, gives rise, we think, as a panel, to some sort of governance issue. What responsibility, by way of good governance, do these intermediaries play in the supply chain? And more than that, does it make good business sense for intermediaries such as shippers to actually take responsibility and distinguish themselves as ethical suppliers in the marketplace by taking this issue seriously. So whilst as a lawyer I'd be very fascinated to pursue a legal sort of course today, I'm going to withhold my inclination to do that and ask these guys to focus on what's happening on the ground with respect to various of these intermediaries in their lives. So I'm going to give the floor first of all to Darcy, who is the boatman, to kick off the discussion. Thank you.
Hello, Darcy Quinn from CropLife International, but I'm speaking here today really on behalf of the brand owners in this room, including the brand owners from BASCAP and my neighbor here who's in charge of the IACC, another group of brand owners in the United States. And as brand owners, we represent billions of dollars of business to shippers and other people that live off of our legitimate business. Billions of dollars. And when I was coming down the elevator to this room, one word just resonated in my mind where somebody I heard on the elevator or in the escalator say, "We're victims of counterfeiters." I'm thinking, I don't work with victims. Plus group of people and call yourselves victims, okay? That's the whole point. There is no counterfeiter. Have you ever really met a counterfeiter? There's just a bunch of people that are aiders and abettors to delivering illegal product, namely counterfeit, from point A to point B. But a counterfeiter isn't some guy in a go-down in the backwaters of China. It's the bankers that finance the counterfeiters. It's the delivery boys, the vessel companies that deliver the counterfeits. It's perhaps your own distribution chain. So rather than us looking out and always talking about this elusive counterfeiter, let's look at our own practices and what we can do within our own reach and our own business practices and get rid of this mythological counterfeiter and start looking at the people that do not consider themselves counterfeiters, but in fact, without those people, the aiders and abettors, you would not have counterfeits. So I'm already way off speech here, so let me get back to the bit. Okay. What the question is today, and I'm going to address vessel owners, okay? These are the people that take the counterfeits from point A, where they're made, and deliver them to point B. Now, we're always blaming the folks in point A, which is frequently China, or we're sometimes occasionally going after the people in point B. In this case, it would be the EU. But we forget that without the delivery boys, there would be no counterfeits in point B. And the delivery boys aren't undercover criminal organizations that are smuggling this stuff illegally, this, that, and the other. The delivery boys are the huge vessel companies that everybody knows about that are listed on the stock exchange. And what makes it even more outlandish when I hear about this victim language is that they are your very own service providers. So in other words, when you're in the EU and you discover all of a sudden mysteriously a container of counterfeit product in the EU, you're shocked. You know, how did this get in here? And everybody's complaining who's going to pay for the storage and destruction costs, and we have to find the counterfeiters, which you'll never do. And everybody's ignoring the obvious. The people who are delivering those counterfeits are huge shipping companies that, again, are your service providers. So there's Maersk, CMA CGM, I think one called Haunda. They all work for you. So let's get real. Let's get back into the parameters of what we can control. And what I'm going to talk today is, as in the intermediary, are in fact the shipping companies that are delivering the counterfeits. We're like a robbery victim that allows ourselves to be robbed. And not only do we allow ourselves to be robbed, afterwards we actually pay the robber to do it again. Because when this stuff is coming in, and it gets seized by your very own service providers, You end up in the EU because of some highly dysfunctional laws in the EU that are unfair on all levels, unfair business practice, everything. Those laws require that the brand owners pay for the storage and destruction of the counterfeits. Why? You haven't done anything wrong. The people who should be paying are the delivery boys. They're the last people that brought the counterfeits in. Those are the people you need to go to. But all of a sudden, they clothe themselves in this EU regulation that I think personally has been misinterpreted to say that the storage and delivery costs are the responsibility of the brand owners. You go back to your CEOs and you explain that to your CEOs and tell your CEO to explain that to the board of directors and then ultimately to the shareholders. Because basically, by accepting paying storage and destruction costs for counterfeits being delivered by your own service providers that deliver your own legitimate product, that's going to be a hard story for anybody to swallow, even for a CEO with his stock options, okay? So I'm working with the CEOs of my companies now, and when I told them about this, they went berserk. And they said, Darcy, you go back into each one of our companies for 2 or 3 days, and you kick the tires, and you find out where we can tighten things up, especially in regards to this whole issue that our own service providers, and that includes distributors at times, it could be anybody, are carrying and are part of the counterfeit issue. We've always been externalizing the problem when in fact a lot of the control is within our own reach. So I'm going to shipping departments now in different multinationals and saying, are you telling or asking your service providers if they want to deal with counterfeiters and do they want to deliver counterfeits? It's an easy question. Do you, as a vessel company, want to deal with counterfeiters and deliver counterfeits? The obvious answer is no. So the next question you ask them is, what are you doing about it? And then you get all kinds of smoke and mirrors, well, under code this and maritime law that. And it's like, no, 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 no. We're not asking you to stop the counterfeits. We're asking you one little question here. Do you even ask of your clients, what's your name? Who are you? And they say to me, we don't have an obligation to do that. We have zero obligation. I'm thinking, we're in the 21st century here. We're blabbering away about free trade and everything else, and we've missed one important part. Moral business behavior, rational business behavior. You cannot have free trade without responsibility. And this is the weak link in this whole counterfeiting chain, that legitimate shipping companies that don't want to be dealing with counterfeiters are dealing with counterfeiters, but the problem is when they get caught delivering the counterfeits, and frequently they don't know that they're delivering the counterfeits, they push the burden on our back. So we end up paying storage and destruction costs. So you know what we're ending up doing as companies and corporations, all of us here? We're subsidizing the counterfeiters. We're actually taking away all the risk away from the delivery boys who are delivering the counterfeits and from the counterfeiters, and we're subsidizing the counterfeiters. If this is not dysfunctional, you need to go to a psychiatrist. I mean, this is something that even a Freudian shrink needs to, you need 2 or 3 years on this one. So I'm expediting it, okay? I'm taking it to your CEOs, and I'm taking it to your shareholders, okay? The most important department in anti-counterfeiting at this stage is not really the IPR experts. It's the audit department. Take it to your corporate compliance department, your audit department, which I'm doing with my clients. I'm saying, look, you're actually subsidizing the very people that are delivering the counterfeits. So, you're paying a fortune for this. Storage and destruction costs for chemicals is magnificent, also for shoes or for anything else. So bring in your respective companies, the audit departments, the corporate governance departments, but it's got to start from the CEO, because if you go back to the big lump of middle management, you get all the experts to tell you why it can't be done. So I'm going to the CEOs of my companies, and they're saying, the doors are open for you in my company. Everybody's got to talk to you, and we're going through company by company now, and it's very basic. When you're talking, for instance, to the people who are dealing with the shipping contracts, they don't even have to redraft the contracts at this point. All they've got to do is take their finger and push the send button to all the people that are delivering product for you, the vessel companies, to say, dear vessel company, dear service provider, we want to make sure that you know your customers. We're putting you on notice now. We're having a huge counterfeit issue. We suspect that you are inadvertently at times delivering the counterfeit, but we would like to put you on notice now that we expect you as a reasonable business partner, as a service provider to us, that if you want our business, you're going to start a due diligence program. And it's going to be very basic. When people come in and deliver container loads of stuff to you, you don't have to inspect the containers. You don't have to be an IPR expert. You have to ask one question. What's your name? And I will tell you, just that question itself will take the counterfeiters, and they'll move on to the next company and the next vessel company until they find one that doesn't ask that question. And by doing that, two things are going to happen. You're going to make the job of customs in the import country a lot easier, because when they're profiling containers, they're going to know 1 or 2 years down the line, when this is all set up, which vessel companies have a Know Your Customer program and which don't, and they're going to search the vessels that don't want to know their customers, and that's where they're going to find the contraband and the counterfeit. Point two, this is not bad news for the vessel companies. I talked to a guy this morning who was representing the vessel companies, and he's a lobbyist for them, and I said, this is a business advantage for your industry, because the vessel company that goes back to the billion-dollar clients that are in this room now, the billions and billions of dollars, the vessel company that goes back and says, we have a Know Your Customer program, and we are aware of your counterfeit issues, guess what? They're going to get our business, and the ones that don't aren't. And it's already starting to happen. Yesterday I heard one massive vessel company got fired from one massive industry because that vessel company said, we don't have any responsibility for checking our customers. So the client said, fine, we're not working with you anymore. So the word's out. I'm going to be talking to the CEOs of the vessel companies as well, because this is not a threat. This is a business advantage for them. So I see it as tripless. In other words, we don't have to talk about TRIPS, IPR laws, or anything else. This is just a business proposition that'll work, okay? But we cannot keep the status quo subsidizing the counterfeiters for product that's being seized. No counterfeiter, no vessel companies are taking any risk at all. The vessel companies I've dealt with, I'll bust them with 28 tons of toxic pesticides. They swear in the Bible they'll never do it again, and 2 weeks later they're shipping for the exact same exporter in China. And then they're innocent again. So I'm saying, well, listen, fool me once, fool me twice, but this is, you know what? We're getting our act together. We're not going to be victims of counterfeiters, so we're going to the departments that are going to be asking the hard questions of the vessel companies. We're going to inspire the vessel companies to set up programs, to know their customers. Everybody's going to be happy at the end of the day. But I suggest that you start clicking away to your CEOs, because this is where it's going to start. It's not going to start with the experts. And tell your CEOs that on one hand, you're getting robbed by somebody. On the other hand, they're your service providers. And that's the whole theme, okay? So thank you very much.
Thanks, Darcy. Plenty of passion there, which is good. Bob, do you want to go next?
Sure.
Thanks.
Well, that's quite a tough act to follow there, Darcy, but I'll do my best. I'm going to start off my presentation making you a promise, which is I'm going to make sure I challenge the translators up there, make sure they get paid for what they're doing here today. You heard about, over the course of the conference, there's a consistent theme of public and private partnerships. This panel in particular is focused on corporate responsibility, due diligence, and asking businesses to know their customers. Today I'm going to talk about a unique initiative developed in New York City that combines both corporate compliance and a robust public and private partnership. It's important that I describe the challenges that brand holders faced in New York City and how that strategy of holding landlords accountable for their actions of their tenants has been enormously successful. Some of you may be familiar with New York City, particularly the Garment District, also known as the Fashion District. It's a neighborhood located in New York City, borough Manhattan. It's a dense concentration of fashion-related uses given to the neighborhood. It's generally considered to span between 5th Avenue and 9th Avenue, from 34th Street to 42nd Street. It's been known since the early 20th century as the center for fashion manufacturing, fashion design in the United States. Unfortunately, in 2002, it was also known as Counterfeit Alley. Less than 1 square mile in the area, the neighborhood became home and the epicenter of the wholesale distribution of counterfeit goods. In 2002, no other U.S. city had a comparable concentration of wholesalers selling and shipping counterfeit product. The decline of the legitimate manufacturing sector and the rise of the counterfeit trade proved to be a serious problem for both the rights holders and New York City government. These once vibrant high-rise buildings became vertical flea markets. Every floor in numerous buildings were comprised of counterfeit goods from every industry you could imagine, from floor to ceiling. Despite the fact that hundreds of arrests were made and millions of dollars of counterfeit goods were seized, the problem continued to grow in magnitude. In addition, and you got to get a sense of these buildings in Midtown, these landlords were being paid $25,000, they call it key money. And what would happen is if you wanted to rent a cubicle, because really it's the size of about 15 by 20 room, you had to pay under the table $25,000 just to have the right to rent the room. In addition, you paid the rent, and you would see, so each particular cubicle, $25,000 just to rent the room, $3,000 a month in rent, all the counterfeit goods that were being sold from the building, vans coming up from all different parts of the tri-state area to pick up goods to bring them out to flea markets. UPS trucks that would be full, they'd be making 4 or 5 pickups a day to take goods out of the building. It was a tremendous problem. I spent a lot of years, as Paul mentioned, in law enforcement. I commanded a major case narcotic unit with the NYPD. One of the successful strategies we had were going after crack houses in addition to arresting people, but going after closing these houses down, holding the landlords accountable for the people that were in there selling drugs. In 2002, I approached the mayor's office in New York City at that time with the support of a couple brands. At that time, I was with the Recording Industry Association of America, and we offered them a plan. And we said, look, let's go after these landlords, because despite the fact that the police are doing a great job, despite the fact that their resources are stretched thin, they go in and they make arrests, and there's 10 people behind them to just walk in and just continue to sell the goods. Unfortunately, in New York City, they go to jail overnight and then they're back out. So although at that time I looked great back at the recording industry, I could run back and say, gee, we arrested 100 people and we seized 500,000 counterfeit CDs, I wasn't really solving the problem. What we proposed was a zero-tolerance policy which utilized the police, New York City Department of Finance, code enforcement, building inspectors, the fire department. They went into these buildings, they took a look at them. If the elevators didn't work properly, they fined the landlord. If there was garbage in front of the location that didn't get picked up, they fined the landlord. There's also a Chapter 7, which is in the Administrative Code of New York City. It's for nuisance abatement. And it was used for prostitution houses, for drug houses. And in New York City, it's three instances of a violation. So you can combine, if the police go in and they buy a counterfeit product, that's one instance. If there's a code violation, they could use that as an instance, that's 2. When they get 3, they could literally get a court order and they would get a vacate order to close these buildings. The program really started to evolve in 2003 when they started to raid these buildings. They would do early morning raids. They would literally go in with big yellow construction chutes. I don't have a picture, but that's how much goods were in there because they couldn't carry them out. They would put those yellow construction chutes at the window, shoved the counterfeit goods down there into a truck, and they would literally load up tractor trailer fulls just in one building to take the counterfeit goods out there. The police would be out there for days on end. That's how much goods were in these buildings at that time. The good news is, it might have been the first or second building. When they went into the building, they raided it, they shut it down, and in one instance, they physically brick and mortared the entrance and the exit, so nobody could even go in or out of the building at that point. What they do is they go into court. The city looks to settle these things with stipulated agreements. What they do get from when they settle these are, the city gets the right to unannounced inspections into the building, a review of the tenants list. They ask the landlord to take out a bond, and if they see selling counterfeit goods out of that building again, they forfeit that bond. To date, 37 locations in New York were closed. They're reopened since the settlements. Over $52 million were collected in seized goods, and over $2.5 million in settlements, which the city gets, which were fines to the landlords, which actually pay for the program that the mayor's office has. In addition, we developed in New York, we actually incorporated a task force. When we first started this, I think there were 3 or 4 brands that were supporting recording industry when we put this together. Now there's about 40 or 45 brands that are part of the New York task force. What we do is ask the brands to contribute a couple $1,000s a year. And what they do is the city uses that money for the bags and tags and to destroy the evidence. Other than that, it's all on the city's dime. At one point, I took a look at this, and if you look at a cost-benefit analysis, it'd be something great to invest in. I mean, because the city, a brand owner would invest $2,000 or $3,000 a year. The city would invest on one raid $20,000 in overtime, whatever it costs with the trailers and the manpower. So it's been a tremendous program. And I know in the past, I'm sure there's a lot of attorneys in here, and you've gone after landlords civilly and civil programs. But this is one where there's collaboration between the brands, there's collaboration with city government, and your tax money is being used to do the same thing. The city has a bank of attorneys, and they go in and they file for these vacate orders, and they go in and the police go in and take the product out. So it's worked very well. Now, I will say, you know, just like every other criminal enterprise, they evolve as the police and the strategies evolve. In this particular case now, what the city did is they changed the focus, they moved it over. If you go to Midtown now, those buildings are fairly clean, and legitimate tenants have displaced the illicit tenants. What they did in 2008, the city decided to try to expand it to Canal Street. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with Canal Street. In February, they did an operation called Counterfeit Triangle in the heart of Chinatown. They conducted pre-dawn raids on 32 storefronts, seized 2 semi-tractor trailers full of counterfeit goods. Since that time, the city's raided a total of 62 stores in the Chinatown area. Street value of the goods they seized is over $2 million. And those stores cover about 2 blocks just in Canal Street, which is a tremendous problem for most. As I said, they evolve, it changes. If you go down to Canal Street now, a lot of the goods aren't in open view for sale. You'll see roving vans that come by, and if you're a tourist and you've never been there, don't get in the van. A lot of people do that, because if you get in the van and the police come on the street, they'll drive away with you in the van. They really don't care. Or they'll take you down a basement. And when they take you down a basement and you're going to look at product, if the police come on the block, they shut the power down, and you may stay down there for 2 or 3 hours, which has happened, and some of these people have been arrested for unlawful imprisonment. So it does happen. I don't have a daughter, but I have sons and daughter-in-laws, and I say don't go down there and buy the goods for obvious reasons, but also these reasons that people really don't know because they get attracted to Canal Street. This program's been exported to different places. I know it's been in effect probably shortly after 2003, to some extent. Of course, it's a little bit different over in Beijing in the Silk Market. There's a program that's run by Baker McKenzie, I believe, Joe Simone, and it goes after landlords down in the Silk Market. Also, we took the program out to Los Angeles, and what we did is we brought folks down from the mayor's office in New York City and said, look, can you come out and explain the program to government officials out in Los Angeles? They were very receptive to that. When they came out there, they cherry-picked out what they thought could work out in Los Angeles, and what they found in Los Angeles was that their nuisance abatement statute did not cover trademark goods. So they changed it, and they passed a new law, and since then they've gone after flea markets and they've gone after some retail stores. So it's been a great program, and again, it's a creative way in a time when brands, and not just brands, but the police, your resources are stretched thin. And, you know, I got to tell you, and I say this all the time, ICC, we're looking at a lot of different programs, collaborating on the pay providers online, looking to collaborate with them and get the brands to work together on attacking that problem. And at some point, you know, government comes to us and they say, look, we're willing to help, we're willing to raid flea markets, we're willing to be trained by brands, but we're not willing to do it 25 times a month. We can't do it. So if you come together and if you want to train, if you bring a lot of different brands at one time, it's very effective for us. If you want to raid places and you get enough brands together, we'd rather do that than go back to the same place over and over again and just going after different people. And quite honestly, to be effective, when you go into these places, you want to close them down. You don't want to leave them in business. You know, that was one of the things when I was with the music industry. We could have done this project alone, but it really wouldn't have been effective because at the end of the day, we would go in and we'd take out the music and everybody else's goods would be in there, so they just wouldn't sell music. So it's been a great program. Look forward to any questions you have at the end of the panel discussion, and I thank the Global Congress for inviting me. Thank you.
Thanks, Bob. Well done. Now, heading over to Christian, who's going to talk about free trade zones, another obviously key part of the transshipment issue. This is very pertinent today of all days because barely got off the Eurostar this morning and bumped into Lucy at Nokia, who tells me that the Advocate General has issued the guidance in their transshipment case, which is not very good news. In essence, it allows the transshipment of goods through the European Union into third-party countries without allowing customs to use the counterfeit goods regulation on the basis that those goods are not intended for sale in the EU. So you see how everything changes very quickly, and today is a good day to be discussing this, and the actual transshipment issue and the topic of how do we empower these intermediaries to do things at borders. So with that background, over to Christian.
Thank you very much, Paul. Very bad news indeed. I'll try to raise up a little bit the morale. I did some research recently, and I discovered that free zones were the first attempts to establish free trade zones go back to the 14th century, where German traders created special areas within the Northern Sea to allow facilitations in trade. Free trade zones were established to reduce barriers and facilitate global free trade. They provide important economic stimulus to national economies, local economies, employment, and to business that operate there. They have played an important role in the globalization of world economy. We know that free trade zones promote economic growth in terms of foreign investment, employment, technology, and industrialization. Not surprisingly, the number of these zones have grown up exponentially, and I believe to more than 3,000 nowadays in 135 countries. This is, of course, very good news. Especially developing countries benefit from free trade zones. There is increased trade, employment, enhancement to infrastructures. The bad news is that, unfortunately, organized crime groups and counterfeiters have also taken an interest in free trade zones. And when I talk about free trade zones, I refer to free economic zones, export processing zones, free port, industrial free zones, technical free zones. Just for those of you who are keen on terminology, I refer to free economic zones and free trade zones as encompassing all these categories. So what's worse is that to do so, these counterfeiters and organized crime groups, they exploit the flexibilities of the incentives that are provided within the free economic zones. They exploit the ecosystem that governments have put in place to help free trade zones contribute to economic development. What are in particular these flexibilities that criminals take advantage of? Of course, they take advantage of limited regulatory oversight. They take advantage of customs and tax and product regulation that do not apply or are rarely enforced. They take advantage of limited inspections on containers in transit. The simple inaction of government in itself, who may consider free zone to be immune from the laws that govern the rest of the economy, is an advantage for organized crime groups engaged in counterfeiting and piracy. Around the world, there are new laws that are being passed to fight counterfeiting. There is more money being spent on law enforcement. Penalties and monetary fines are going up, and lawsuits are being filed. Judges are reacting, so there is a reaction. The law is and will be looking more closely at criminals who are illegally exploiting free zones. Let's see a little bit in details what are the actions that are performed by this organized group in free trade zones. What they do usually is, for instance, they disguise the origin of fake goods, both the origin and the nature of illicit goods. Counterfeiters import shipments of counterfeit goods into the warehouses in free trade zones, and then they change the final destination and they re-export them. In this way, of course, free trade zones are used to sanitize shipments and documents and disguise the original point of manufacture or departure. Another action that is performed is to use free trade zones as distribution points. So basically, goods come into free trade zones and then they are exported again and again losing traces of the documentation and of the origin of products. Free trade zones are also used to process goods. For instance, unfinished goods. They can be further manufactured by adding counterfeit trademarks. They can be repacked or relabeled and then exported as finished counterfeit goods to other countries. And last but not least, the complete manufacture of counterfeit goods in free trade zones. We see that there is, anyway, despite all these difficulties, there is room for optimism somehow. Governments are finding that it's no longer acceptable to look at the other way when it comes to the illegal activities being conducted in free trade zones. There are some interesting case laws that I would like to share with you today that gives you a sense of this trend towards a different approach in facing this issue. For example, in the free trade zone of Ras Al Khaimah in the United Arab Emirates in 2009, not too long ago, a successful criminal prosecution was brought against a counterfeiter that was making fake cooling gas cylinders, and of course, belonging to an important and famous mark in the industry. To our knowledge, and this is somehow worrying, this is only the first case, the first known case of successful criminal prosecution against any enterprise operating in a free trade zone. Of course, those responsible were punished, sentenced to jail. It's an important and welcome development that should serve as best practices in achieving an improved regulatory framework against illicit operations in free trade zones. Another important case law is in the Mersin free zone in Turkey. The High Court recently confirmed that free zones remain within the territorial boundaries of the country and that no immunity is given by the laws applying to free zones with respect to the use of trademarks. You can imagine that this kind of doctrine, if evolved, might lead to a different approach in dealing with this issue. Similarly, and that's the third case, in the Westport free zones in Port Klang, Malaysia, after 9 years, the court determined that free zones are not excluded from customs powers of enforcement or to the exclusion of the operation of other laws, including the Trademark Act, the Trade Description Act, just because it is deemed to be outside of Malaysia. This is important because, it removes any uncertainty over the powers that customs or any other enforcement agencies have within free trade zones. So the point is that here we need to strike a balance between trade controls and trade facilitation. And the ideal is to improve this model of governance so that free trade zones can take a more proactive role in combating against illicit trade. In order to achieve these results, there are a set of measures that can be put in place. For instance, legislation should explicitly define what are considered prohibited goods. Customs should have the authority over goods in transit and free zones. And unfortunately, the information that we just got from Paul doesn't get into this state of mind. But I would wish to recall what the Director, John Morton, made quite clear yesterday, that as long as the US is concerned, any goods in transit can be inspected and seized if necessary. In application, we are hopeful that certain principles will become global standards sooner or later. An application procedure to request action by customs should be instituted. And samples of detained or seized goods should be provided to trademark holders. You have heard it many times in these last 2 days. Customs should have ex officio powers to detain goods that they suspect are infringing intellectual property rights. It's important to reduce the burdens and transfer liability to the trademark owner to enhance the detention and seizure process. And also, a simplified procedure for the destruction of infringing intellectual property rights should be instituted. As I mentioned before, just to contrast these activities of criminal groups operating in free trade zones, the provisions that are allowing for the change of destination of goods suspected of infringing intellectual property rights should not be applicable. And it's also important to prevent or restrict the level of permitted repackaging and relabeling of goods within the free trade zones, particularly in respect of origin, nature, and destination. And this goes back to a recommendation that was made public in 2008 on a report from the Foreign Investment Advisory Service of the World Bank that said clearly customs rules and regulations should be developed drawing upon World Customs Organization and World Trade Organization provisions, and fast-track implementation of automated customs systems with proper inventory controls and audit system within special economic zones. We know that this process will take a while before it comes into practice, and these actions, government relationship, they require a certain degree of time to be matured and to be developed. So before government laws and regulations, fines and penalties can catch up, there is much that we can do business to business to help ourselves. And it's with this in mind that BASCAP is proactively developing products on due diligence and voluntary actions, including the development of best practices guidelines that could provide useful training material, for instance, to train operators in free trade zones. Best practices, I'm not referring to legal remedies, which business can pursue to assess the effectiveness and improve controls and the security of their supply chain. The signature of a Memorandum of Understanding between BASCAP and the World Free Zones Convention, for instance, could build upon the existing cooperation agreement and MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, signed with the World Customs Organization following a highly successful joint forum with this group held in 2006. It's important to stress that arising from this forum, from this joint forum, the World Free Zone Convention stated that its network would be looking at ways to strengthen their cooperation with customs and to eradicate customs fraud. Firstly, at the potential for member state accession to the revised Kyoto Protocol Convention, and secondly, at the possibility of becoming authorized economic operators as is envisaged in the World Customs Organization Safe Framework of Standards. Thanks to the work undertaken by BASCAP, we now have the opportunity to develop a real and effective public-private partnership between our respective organizations and those in the public sector. We can achieve a better global governance model for free trade zones in which intellectual property rights are respected and enforced, and legitimate trade can be fostered and developed without any encumbrance. We can improve the understanding of best practices in legislation, case decisions, custom and recent proposals under consideration globally, so as to strengthen both the laws as well as cooperation among different actors in the supply chain. It is hoped that through better understanding and better practices, policymakers will be better equipped to develop new legislation and action plans. You need better knowledge if you want to achieve better regulations. We all hope that this process will lead to the introduction to some specific legal and regulatory remedies, which will ultimately result in an improved operating framework where legitimate operators and enterprises can thrive and any or all illicit activities controlled or consigned to history. We, as BASCAP members, look forward to working with interested parties in the coming months and years to develop our common aims and objectives in tackling what has become one of the leading threats to global economic prosperity and trade. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian. And I now turn to Christophe, who's going to tell us about another interesting self-help remedy, and that's in the context of trade fairs, which has been very successful. So, Christophe.
Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank to INPI and to WIPO and the further organizers for inviting me to this Congress and especially to this high-ranking panel. I am deeply honored to be with you these 2 days. One important part of the supply chain are exhibitions and trade shows. Exhibitions are mirrors of marketplaces. They function as platforms for innovations and trends. They present what a given industry has to offer in terms of new ideas, inventions, and concepts. Exhibitions give visitors a compact overview of the market, and the exhibitors themselves can, of course, benefit from this overview too. Nowhere is it as easy to compare one's own products with those of competitors as at exhibitions. It thus came as no surprise to learn that this is precisely at exhibitions and trade shows that companies often first realize that imitations of their products exist. The legal provisions regarding the protection of intellectual property rights must be respected at exhibitions too. Anyone infringing the intellectual property rights of others at an exhibition can be brought to court and sued under civil law as well as prosecuted under criminal law here and in Switzerland. MCH Swiss Exhibition, as an organizer of about 80 exhibitions, has of course a major interest in court action being taken against product piracy and sanctions being imposed for it. However, imitations and counterfeits infringe the rights of the particular right holder, so it is in first the holder of the infringed right who can investigate measures. The trade fair management generally is not legitimized to initiate action by itself against any infringements that may have occurred. It is a matter for exhibitors to protect their intellectual property rights and to take measures to prevent infringements or to have the infringers prosecuted. This is the actual and general situation for exhibitions and trade shows. But I can give you an example where we can go on. We heard in the last 2 days a lot about the problem of enforcing IPR rights. What I would like to give you is a short example of a procedure to fight quick and effective against counterfeited products, also at exhibition, at the example of the Basel World, the world leading show for watches, jewelry in Basel, which takes every year. All big companies, you know it from here, from the Place Vendôme and others, all big companies and legally spoken IPR holders of the watch and jewelry field exhibit their products at the show. It is the most important show for the retailer of these goods. It's a business-to-business show, and the estimations go in the many hundred millions for turnover, which are done only during 8 days. Some facts and figures: there are 2,000 exhibitors, 100,000 visitors, 45 participating countries from all over the world with, among others, 350 companies from Hong Kong, 45 from China, 40 from India, etc., etc. Already 26 years ago, that means in the 1980s, the management of the show in Basel was confronted with the problem of imitations and counterfeited products. I think that the luxury industry was the first industry which was really confronted. What could then, at this time, an exhibitor do when he was confronted with the fact that he saw an imitated or counterfeited product at the booth of another exhibitor? He had to go to the Civil Court of Basel City and to submit a case by demanding for provisional or super-provisional measure. That means to ask for confiscation of the object by the police, hearings before the judge, waiting before the judge, and then, because it's the weekend in between, and to wait. And during this procedure, the show went on, the products were at the window cases and were still offered at the booth. When the decision came, it was often too late, the damage was done, and the show was over, and the business with counterfeited products was also done. Just to imagine, to give you one example, on one Friday afternoon, the Civil Court of Basel City was confronted with 30 cases on one only afternoon by different exhibitors. This was too much for everybody. It was a big, big bad publicity. A bad publicity for the exhibiting companies, a bad publicity for the country of origin, a bad publicity also for us from the management of the trade show. We sit together and we came to the solution that we have to go the other way. That means in 1985 we created something like an in-house arbitration instance called the panel. The task of this panel is to decide quick and effective and within a short time frame on all objects of the show when an exhibitor comes to the conclusion that his IPR right is violated by another exhibitors. How does it work? It's a specialized internal court of arbitration which is instead of the ordinary civil court to keep the exhibition peace. It's an instrument for the exhibitors to protect their IPRs within and during the show. What we guarantee is a decision within 24 hours during all days. The legal base of this are, of course, the panel regulations, which are a part of the exhibitors' contracts, and we foresee that the ordinary courts are possible only after the show. And we guarantee also no bad publicity for all involved parties. We do not open the case for anybody and do not say who was the party or not. The composition and procedure of this panel is internationally. The court would be national, of course, but we have an international, 7 members, 4 lawyers, Swiss lawyers, because Swiss law is applied, but 3 experts from France, Italy, and Japan. We make this quick and effective procedure with a written decision within the shortest time, 24 hours. The procedure in a concrete case is as follows. An IPR holder foresees that his IPR right is violated by another exhibitor. He comes to us, he presents a valid extract of a registered IPR right in Switzerland. We send a delegation there at the booth. He has to temporarily surrender us the contested object. We discuss the case within the panel in a plenary session at 5 p.m. and the written decision will be during the night. The next morning we give information for both parties about our findings. The party who has violated an IPR has to sign an undertaking with immediate withdrawal of the contested object, and he has to pay a fee of 4,000 Swiss francs, that is a little bit $4,000 US. What are the effects of these decisions? Legally, of course, these decisions are limited during and within the show, but they are often a base for a decision of an eventual non-admittance to the next show. And you know that the show is so important, it means for them exclusion for the world market for the next 12 months if they are not admitted. In fact, the panel decisions have become something like an expert opinion for ordinary courts in Switzerland and abroad. What we could see that we had a reduction of the cases. We started with 50 cases during these 8 days per year. We are now between 15 to 16 cases, but in a growing market of copies and imitations in the luxury industry worldwide. We have a preventive effect. That means doubtful objects will not be brought to the show. Counterfeiters and imitators know what they risk when they come at Basel. And as Quint D'Arcy said, panel is no more something bad and negative. It has become for us, for the company, as an attribute of quality. It has become as a USP for the exhibition organizer MCH Group Ltd. That means we had in the last 26 years about 800 cases to decide. All 800 cases are stocked. I have a whole data bank about all these cases. And in 3 or 4 cases, we came to the conclusion that it is a violation. And I fully agree that there is a growing responsibility of the exhibition industry as for other industries too. And I would say we have 3 concrete steps to look at. I think before every trade show, preventive measures, that means providing of information on IPR protection, should be done to the exhibitors, eventually a non-admission to the trade show for doubtful exhibitors. During, we have to foresee a procedure for compulsory measures. That means to foresee immediate withdrawal of contested objects. That means exclusion of the market during the most important time. But what we also offer is some soft measures for other shows, like providing interpreters to facilitate communication in the case of disputes with foreign exhibitors, on-site office to deal with an IPR request or complaint, and exhibitors should be encouraged to indicate that their products are protected by IP rights where applicable. And after the show goes on, that's an information campaign. We, from the MCH Group, we have a strong cooperation with business associations around the world in the different countries. I am often in China, in Hong Kong, and in Bangkok, and I have the possibility to give some education seminars there for the exhibiting companies so that they learn what's allowed and what's not allowed. And we have also in Basel a good cooperation with the custom authorities due to the international airport at the frontier line between Switzerland and France. And what is also important is, I think, these products are only produced because there is a demand from consumers. Therefore, it's absolutely important to support any kind of public awareness campaigns. I can cite just Stop Piracy in Switzerland, which is a fantastic cooperation between the private and the public sector to raise public awareness. The fact and the conclusion is exhibitions are important. They are an important step in the supply chain for the protection of IPR and should be enforced, but there are some business practice which can be done also at other shows so that counterfeiters and imitators cannot go on with their business. I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you, Christophe. And lastly, Olivier. And could I remind everyone to please switch off their mobile phones? That was mine.
Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to discover very simple solutions to tackle the problem of counterfeit using intermediaries. So I will try to raise some points. What I would like to do first is to explain exactly what is the postal sector, because I guess some of you know the melon and the PO boxes, things like that. But what we are talking about when we speak about international flows of post is letters from 0 to 2 kilos, is parcel from 0 to 20, 30 kilos, it depends on the country, and it's EMS, Express Mail Services, which is a product which belongs to the rules of the Universal Postal Union. Those flows are ruled under the rules of UPU, Universal Postal Union, which is an international treaty signed by 191 states, and engaging those states to permit the freedom of trade and other nasty things yet maybe you don't like. So I will add also the fact that I give you just an example. In 2008, the postal sector carried about 433 billion items of mail from 0 to 2 kilos, where you can put something. And I mean a goods, a legitimate one, or unfortunately, and it's happening, the fake one. And on parcels, the data are about 6.5 billion a year. So as you may notice, it's quite a nightmare for customs authorities, the problem of counterfeit into the postal sector, because with the development of internet and with the development of selling distance, you can find and you can buy directly from your home quite almost everything. And normally we try to avoid distributing it, but it happens. Unfortunately, it happens that we distribute those product counterfeit. So just a last data to give you an overview. We have 5.6 billion people working for us because all of you are sending mails and things like that. So in a way, I will join Darcy on that. We are all together in the same supply chain. What is the postal process? It's a complicated one, and it's why the issue of the counterfeit into the postal process is a very complicated one. We are not an integrated network. If you look at, for example, FedEx or UPS, when you go to an agency into Thailand, in Phuket, for example, and you want to send those beautiful Abercrombie & Fitch T-shirts you have found in the beach, you can use this FedEx or UPS, but it's own office of FedEx or UPS. On the postal sector, you can use Thailand Post, and if you use Thailand Post, it's a national administration, and they have their own right on the country, and they do almost what they want. And my influence as La Poste, or my influence as a European postal operator, is very limited on Thailand Post, and I'm not even speaking on China Post, for example. My problem with that is the fact that we're also offering a very cheap service. In fact, if you look correctly of the positionment of the post and the different others type of business I mentioned, like FedEx or UPS, if it's slow, light, and cheap, it's us, you know. So in a way, and you are very happy because I see smiles on the face. So you are very happy to find us, to not sending a little letter of 20 grams from China to Europe at more than 100 euros, for example. So we try to continue with this level of activity as main this price. We try to continue with this level of amount of things. I mentioned that, billions of amounts. And as a customer, you are expecting fast service, at least fast service. So it's one of the major problems for us that some counterfeiters are using our network to send counterfeit. It's true. It's true. We know that. So what we have done, it's a very, very beginning subject into the postal sector. And I'm quite happy to be here because we with Italy and Germany and England, be one of the first country to raise this issue in the postal sector and fight against that. In 2008, how the UPU work. The UPU, the International Treaty of the UPU, is built every 4 years. Every 4 years, you have a Congress. We reunite all the countries of the world, and we discuss during 4 to 6 weeks all the text, and we finally adopt this international treaty adopted by all the states. In 2008, in the last Congress in Geneva, with Italy, Germany, and England, UK, sorry, we succeed to forbid the use of postal sector for the counterfeit and pirated items. You can think it was easy, or you can think it's just the beginning, but before 2008, it was not forbidden to send counterfeit item through the postal sector. I mean, for sure, because we were European operators based in France, when we receive a counterfeit, for sure, we have our custom friends in our sorting center who stops those things, and it's totally normal. But the funny thing is that before 2008, we were obliged to pay a fee because we didn't deliver the product. And for example, you have an Asian country, a big one, sending some counterfeit products through our network. We were obliged to pay them a fee because we haven't distributed the product. So it was a victory. It was a tough one. It was a very tough one because I was in the trib at Geneva at this moment, and I can tell you that 22 countries vote against that, and even one European country. I didn't mention it, but for sure. And so, I once again, I would like to thank World Customs Organization, because at those moments there were one representative of the World Customs Organization in the room, and it helped us raising this problem, saying, hey, it's not a lubie of European operators. It's a major issue. And so we have now to tackle it. So it was very helpful, but it's still a very tough question. So now we have the juridical arsenal, we have the law, so we are exempted to pay fees when we stop something, or when the customs stop something in our network. So what can we do now? The first things that we are doing are, maybe you can smile about that, but raise the issue into the postal sector. Because, to be frank with you, we discuss this issue every time we have a meeting. We, as La Poste, we spend about 4 to 6 weeks every year going on those countries, and every time and everywhere in the world saying, hey, we have this issue, we need to tackle this issue, and we need to do something. In March, we are going to Argentina to have a big meeting during 3 days with the DHS, US DHS, with French Customs, with representative of large groups to raise the issue of counterfeit. And why do we do that? Because when you discuss directly with the country, they say to you, some of the country, and unfortunately I will speak about tobacco, for example. Some of the border country of Europe says, hey, you want that I kill myself because I am sending a huge amount of maybe counterfeited or pirated cigarettes to Europe using this network. So why do you want that I kill this business? So it's a question of moral. We try to put in shape the question of law, the question of moral, and also with the help, again, with the WCO, the question of raising the means to fight against that. So it's a beginning. We do conferences, we do raising awareness campaign, we do tests on flows. We are working very well with the customs, the French custom, and all the custom in the world, and with the WCO to try to tackle and say, okay, if I look correctly on the flows of EMS, what kind of product I can find, what kind of country send me something bad. What I can tell you is that we have done this on the EMS, and we, for sure, unfortunately, see a major Asian country who do this type of sendings. But with good news, we find that other countries who vote against those texts are not sending anything using our sector. We also think the European text in terms of security and safety are going to help a lot the customs to do their job, because I forgot to mention it, but I will conclude on that. For sure, we are not an enforcement agency, and we don't want to be an enforcement agency. And I guess you don't want that we become an enforcement agency, like, for example, asking for a blood sample or iris scan of yourself when you come to give us a parcel or something like that. So what we are doing is we work closely with the customs everywhere in the world and say to them, you are the best, you know the concept, you know the product, you are the one in charge of enforcing these things. What we can do is helping you, because just to finalize on that, when you receive 600 kilos, and maybe 1 ton sometimes, of products coming from one single people in China and saying, hey, it is gift. All of those things are gift, and it's less than 22 euros. And I have a lot of friends in Europe, you know. You can say to the custom, hey, maybe you can check this one because I don't feel it will be very okay. I'm ready to answer to your question, and thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you, panelists. We are being a little bit squeezed for time because of the late start, mainly. So I think we have time for a few questions, though. So who'd like to kick off? And please direct your panel to anybody or nobody in particular, depending on what you feel like. We've answered all the questions. Surely Darcy's provoked you into some reaction. Okay, you're probably all being well behaved. One of there? Ah, okay. Microphone not working? That sounds good.
Thank you. 2 very quick questions, please. Darcy, have you considered insurance, as in, have you considered that intermediaries, shippers, the likes, may have some form of collective insurance whereby they change the contract with the person who is giving them the package? They say in that contract, if it's stopped, if we customs decide that it is suspect and we put it into storage, you, the sender, will have to pay for those storage costs if it's proved that the goods are counterfeit. And there could be an insurance policy, a global insurance policy, within the shipping industry, the intermediaries industry, to cope with that. And Olivier, have you considered, I know that you can't give information to us, the private sector, about the names because of the data protection laws. Are there MOUs that can be established, for example, whereby you, the postal sector, give the information to, for example, customs, who under certain rules can give the information to us, the private sector? 2 totally separate questions, but thank you.
On the insurance side, I've considered insurance, and I thought, why should I be considering the insurance? The vessel companies should be considering insurance. I'm taking the monkey off of our back and putting it on their back, but it's one of the options I'm giving them in regards to that particular issue. And then slightly on the second question, what I do encourage is that if you find out that a vessel company is bringing in counterfeit versions of your brand, you send a letter to that vessel company and you put customs in copy to put them on notice that they get 1 free bite like a dog. But the second time they're on notice, they're paying. That's legal. There's no data protection, anything there. Okay, you're stating facts. So 1, on insurance, it's their problem. 2, on getting a list of vessel companies that are delivering the counterfeits. If you're a victim, send a letter to the vessel company, put other people in CC. You're stating a fact. The next time they can't say, we had no idea, because they're on notice, and then they're on the hook for payment and storage.
Thank you, Mary, for your question. It's for sure. What we try to do is to collaborate, as I told you, as maximum in Europe with the custom authorities. And for sure, when we discover something bad or something wrong, we try to inform them. And we even build a common team into one of our sorting center in Roissy, specifically on EMS products. We have a joint team between customs and our people, and they spend all the day going under the sorting center and looking physically at the parcel, saying, "Hey, what do you think of this one? What do you think of this one? Can we open this one immediately? Can we check the whole bunch of those things on this one?" So we try to do that. But to be frank with you, it's why we try to raise the issue, because I know there's something similar maybe in Germany, in UK, in some other country in Europe, and even some others in some specific. In Asia, you have some Hong Kong Post, for example, is very, very keen to send legitimate trade and not fake trade. So they work very closely with their customer, and they inform us of something arriving, saying, "Hey, those things are going through our network, and we are not sure it is perfect." But unfortunately, you have other posts and other custom authority who are less sensitive to the problem. So it's what we can say. But just to answer to your question, I think, to be frank with you, we are going to give the names, but we always give the names to the authority, I mean the customs. And after that, you deal with the customs.
Thank you. Perhaps just one more. If anyone's got any burning questions? No? One there, behind the camera.
So this question is to Darcy, but to anyone on the panel. As most of you or some of you may have heard, the AG opinion in the Nokia and Philips counterfeit goods in transit case was issued today. And in essence, in summarizing the opinion, counterfeit goods in transit through a member state will not be seized unless they are destined for another EU member state, unless the brand owner, the rights holder, can prove or provide sufficient proof that despite the destination, for instance, in our particular case where the goods were destined for Colombia and were counterfeit, transiting through the UK, unless we can prove that they in fact are going to come back to the EU, and unless we can provide sufficient proof on that issue, then they will not be seized. So I'm baffled, and I'm just curious as to whether any of you can come up with some examples of sufficient proof. I guess I'm first interested in Darcy's reaction.
Well, yeah, what's next? Rape in transit? Murder in transit? Robbery in transit? I mean, how stupid can it get?
Thank you, Darcy. I knew I could depend upon you. Please go on.
I don't have to go on. I mean, we're really losing the thread here on sanity. You know, what happened in national sovereignty when there's a crime being created and being done within a country? And, you know, the deal is the crime is in the country. I don't need to go into the mens rea or the motivation of the person who's doing the crime. If you're raping somebody in my country, my laws apply. I don't care if you have an orgasm in the next country. You know? I mean, how stupid does it get? That's the point. And point two, you guys are the winners, okay? You're supposed to be in charge. The governments work for you. You don't work for them. You are the ones that are paying the taxes. How do we get in this position of being victims of counterfeiters? So I think it's time to start questioning the governments and reversing some of the roles and asking questions on some of these ridiculous, you know, because where does it end?
And just to elaborate a bit on that point, not the examples that Darcy gave, but because I have no recent never mind. Anyway, we had a panel earlier this morning on corporate social responsibility. And one of the panelists was representing the Moroccan government and raised the issue of the necessity of having also government social responsibility. And I think this is a good instance where I think we need to demand that there's some social responsibility issue here, you know, on the UK's government's behalf as well as the EU. I mean, again, I think it's just ludicrous that this is being allowed, that it's okay for these, you know, potentially dangerous products to continue on their journey because we don't care. We don't, you know, give a damn about the consumers in the destination country.
Yeah. I think that's, I'm being told by serious people that we need to wrap up, but I think, Lucy, that is a good place to finish because the policy angle of that decision is clearly being lost in the wood for the trees type thing, and no doubt there will be legislation to follow, but hopefully the ECJ will see light and not follow the Advocate General's decision, which sometimes happens, so we can hope and we can lobby. Just very quickly, 30 seconds, thank you very much to the panellists for putting together what I think, at least, and hope you do too, some very interesting and novel ideas on intermediaries. This subject is here to stay. BASCAP are following two work streams, in particular the intermediaries project that I highlighted, and obviously the free trade zones. We've also got Darcy's ideas, the trade fair ideas, etc. So I think lots and lots of good stuff coming out of this session, and we'll be following that up at least in the BASCAP body and other associations. So thank you very much for listening, and thank you again to the panel.